We're talking about war movies of Generation X next on Retro Serial. Hey everyone, I'm ENC. You're watching or listening to Retro Serial. On today's podcast, I have returning guest Derek from Flick Snacks and Knickknacks and Thrash Pondo Ponds, where we are going to be talking about war movies of Generation X and why they're so important. If you want to help us out here on the channel and you're listening to this, please go ahead and write me a review and leave me a rating. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the share button, whether you're listening or watching. Those right there mean the world to me. If you want to go a step further and support us here at Retro Serial, hit the link below and see our Patreon page where you'll find two levels of support. First level is the Cornflake Club. It's just a tip jar. It says, hey, we like what you're doing at Retro Serial. You keep it up over there. But the second level is the Honeycomb Hideout, where you get all videos, well, I should say most all videos, and podcast one day in advance. So if you're interested in supporting us out over there, please do so. And with all that said, going to keep it brief. With all that said, let's just get straight to today's topic. Computer. Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to another podcast episode of Retro Serial. I did an introduction to this already, so I'm going to keep this introduction brief. I know that I say that every time, and a friend of ours, John Collins of the channel, says, well, you introduce both times. I think what I mean to say is I'm not going to belabor the introduction. Because I film it at different times, to not say anything right now kind of feels like a little awkward. So I know I've said something at another time, but I'm going to try to be brief, but just to say nothing at all right now seems awkward. But basically, we're going to be talking about war movies, and I've got my friends here, Thrash Pondo Ponds, as always, awesome co-host, and our good friend Derek from Flick Snacks and Knickknacks is joining us back once again. And actually, you were so I should stop for a second. A long time ago, I did record a war movie one with a friend of mine in like locally, but we lost it. I totally lost it. It got erased. No. It's not in the cloud. I don't know where it is. And I've had that happen on 2 episodes. So to do a war movie was one of those things that I've been interested in doing for a long time, because growing up watching war movies is something that you just did, especially Generation X. I mean, I'm sure for your generation as well, Derek, you grow up watching it. But
my dad, that's what he had on the TV all the time. So yeah,
it was war movies. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he loved it. Anything with Mel Gibson, but he happens to be in a lot of war movies. So
yeah. The other thing is that really what inspired me to redo this show is the series that you're doing right now over on your channel, Derek, where you're picking war movies out of the different. Well, why don't you go ahead and explain it? I'll just let you explain what's going on over at your channel, and then we'll get into war movies of Gen X.
Absolutely. So over at my channel right now, like he said, I got the idea from my dad, actually, who's an Army veteran, and he's big into war films. And he was like, I would love for you to do a couple episodes on some of your favorite war movies. And I said, that's a great idea. I like a good war film, as long as, I don't know. It almost feels bad saying like, I love war movies, because most of the time they're based on real events of, hundreds of people that lost their life. So I guess I shouldn't say I love that, but I like the storytelling and the emotion that it can bring through the screen. And so I was like, yeah, that'll be an interesting subject to tackle. And so I decided to do it where I broke it down kind of into eras. So I did like ancient and medieval, and then I did like what I would call colonial, which would just kind of like 1600, 1900. And then I separated World War I and World War II to give them their own video, because there's so many of those films out there. And then this newest one that I'm working on right now is going to be modern post-World War II films. It could be any of them: Vietnam, Korean, Iraqi, and any of those movies. But one of the things I've been thinking about doing, maybe in continuation, is also doing like a futuristic or sci-fi type of war
I
film
heard
as well.
that. Yeah,
But
yeah.
I don't think I'm gonna do, like I said, and you probably heard this too. I'm not gonna do like Star Wars because I don't consider those humans from Earth. It's gonna have to be like some kind of advanced Earth civilization, continuation of our species, and I think that'd be a pretty interesting topic too.
You could do what was that book movie that we did, Thrash Pondo?
There were a number of them, but the one that jumped into my mind first of all was Things to Come, the post-apocalyptic film where it's sort of an alternate version of how World War II played out. Is that the one you're referring to?
No, we did a video on
was it Dune?
No, it wasn't Dune. It was it was on book versus movie, and it was futuristic humans fighting the bugs.
Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers, of course.
You'll have to do. Of course. Maybe that will make it on your list. I'm
not going to give any spoilers. Maybe my fist pumps did give me spoilers.
Things to Come would be good too.
Things to Come out. Yes, I'll make sure I'll keep that one in mind as well. Like the Tomorrow War is one that I wasn't a fan of necessarily, like in terms of like a great movie. But it is what I would like consider like prime for this type of genre category, like movies that fall into the same type of category that movie does.
Yeah, for sure. Did you grow up on war movies, Thrash Pondo? Was that part of your regular staple?
I certainly did. In fact, that was one of the things that when I was reviewing my notes, I remembered. Back in the 80s, there was a certain obsession we had with World War II, and therefore a lot of these old war movies from like the 60s sort of had a renaissance in the 80s. So even though they weren't really made in the 80s, there were some fantastic war films like the Battle of the Bulge, Battle of Britain, into the 70s with A Bridge Too Far. There were some wonderful World War II movies that became part of our generation, even though they were really more of our parents' generation. And I kind of grew up on those. My grandparents, a lot of our grandparents, of course, served during the wars. One was a mill worker. He worked for U.S. Steel. It was too important where he was. And my other grandfather was in the Army, but was made as a guard in Fort Devens, so never left the country. But both of them contributed to the war effort, I guess you could say. But my father-in-law was a World War II veteran. He was an artillery soldier, and he fought from France well into Germany. So he had a couple of very sad stories. So for some reason, our generation seemed to gravitate to it.
Yeah.
And
I think it's almost every generation. I actually think it's like part of like, I don't know, like being a boy, you know, and like being a male, like whether you join the army or not, you grow up thinking that you're going to join the army because it's part of manliness. You know what I mean? I know that's kind of, it's not a fun thing to talk about, or, you know, people are like, toxic masculinity or something like that. Phooey, all that aside, you're not going to get rid of it. You know what I mean? I mean, it is just part of being a boy and growing up and playing in dirt and shooting, you know, picking up a stick and pretending that somebody is the enemy and you're shooting them and stuff like that. Then you go and you watch, like as I was a kid, I watched G.I. Joe and, you know, wanted to pretend to be G.I. Joe. And you go to the scouts. I was in scouts when I was little because I wanted to, and it was like almost preparation to be in the army. And I never did get to the army. I ended up taking a different course with my life, but you know, you wanted to do that. But you know, one of the things that kind of defined Gen X, and at least I think there seems to be a feature with each generation that are an emphasis, because we're kind of almost always at war, you know. And I think one of the big things, or at least the two big things for me as I look back at Gen X, is I think that we were getting out of the Vietnam War, which was a big deal for us. And then the ever looming Cold War. The ever looming Cold War was a huge deal.
My dad told me how scary that was. Just almost like every day, just thinking, well, we don't know if we're going to wake up to some sort of nuclear attack. And that's when my dad was in the military too, a lot during that time. So there were times where, you know, they would call them and be like, you know, let's go, let's move out. And they would be loading up on a plane and then they would cancel them. Like there was just so much back and forth almost during that time. It's crazy. It's
what years was your dad in the military?
It was
80s, 90s.
He was in from, I believe, 80. I want to say 84 to 89.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
Yeah.
from Grenada to right before First Gulf.
Yes. I think so, right? Yeah, and right before, like a couple years before Desert Storm, right? And
Yeah, First Gulf was 91. So if you got 89,
okay, right.
Just before,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he never actually did see combat, and he was fortunate enough to be stationed on Hawaii for 3 years. So he did have a pretty good time in the military, but there was a lot of that back and forth. We're getting really close, and what's going to happen during that? A lot of those times, those phases.
What branch was he in?
He was in the Army.
Oh, well, thank him for his service for us.
Definitely be sure to thank
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's kind of interesting because the friend that I was going to do war movies with was also in the Army and also stationed in Hawaii.
Wow.
So maybe they
similar
know
years. Yeah, I know. We'll have to
see. He's about 5 years older than I am. So I think the friend that I've had him on this channel a couple of times. His name's Jason, and I think he's like maybe 55 or something like that.
That's how old my dad is.
So maybe he knew your dad.
That's crazy.
That is crazy. You'll have to go
We'll have
back.
to talk about that in a minute. Like we'll text
Right.
each other.
Well,
about that.
okay. So if you go look under GenX Toys, that podcast, he's on there, and also one called Underground Music of Gen X. Maybe he knows him.
I know. I'll just show my dad the video and watch his reaction. Like, do you know this guy?
See if he knows him. Like, to say, hey, here's a picture of some guy. Yeah, but he was in Hawaii, and I think it might have been right around that time. But all right, that is awesome introduction and kind of laying the groundwork for what we're going to be talking about. I don't know exactly how to move through this. I mean, my first idea is just to kind of go like we did last time, decade by decade, 70s, 80s, 90s, and talk about some of our favorite war movies of that era, and the ones that kind of influenced most, that you most find yourself watching or being gravitated toward. Whichever. Let's start. Does that sound like a good idea? You want to start with the 70s?
Sure. Sure.
Whoever wants to go first, start with your favorite war movies of the 70s and why you thought it was impactful for you personally and maybe for our culture.
Sure. Derek, would you like to start?
Oh, yeah. So one that comes to a couple of the ones from the 70s. So when I was making my list, I went like 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then I did like one kind of modern one. But so the 70s had a couple of really good, in my opinion, classics. I haven't seen as many from the 70s, as a matter of fact, as even from the 60s. So it kind of, when I was reviewing my notes, I started noticing that I don't know if the 70s were weaker in terms of what they produced, or if they just happened to, I have just happened to not see as many of them. So most of the ones I've seen from the 70s are pretty mainstream war films, like Tora Tora Tora. Yeah, is a fantastic movie. We've seen, Pearl Harbor attacks on screen several times, but this one does a really good job in the way that it handles like what's going on behind the scenes and the officials and the conversations they have. Mm-hmm. I feel like this movie does that better than a lot of the other Pearl Harbor based films. Two more. I got two more in the 70s. And that came out and said, what's funny, I noticed this too. All three of the 70s movies I wrote notes about. Two of them were from the year 70 and one from the year 71. Okay. And then when I get to my 80s, there aren't any until like 87. So there's like a really big gap too in like war films that I really appreciate. I don't know. It's weird to look at those patterns, but the next one I've got is Johnny Got His Gun from 1971. Mm-hmm. And that's Donald Sutherland. He was a powerhouse in back in the day. And I didn't realize that as much until I started watching a lot of these older war movies. And he's in a lot of these old war films, almost like it was kind of one of his genres he gravitated towards. And I think it's because in real life, he's super anti-war. And like a protester. And so I think that he tries to pervade that through screen. But I just didn't realize how many good movies he was in until recently.
So Donald Sutherland's kind of anti-war. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Very much
yes.
So.
He's like a big outspoken against. I don't know exactly what that means because, I don't want war either. I don't think anybody wants it. But
yeah, right.
But yeah, he's like I think he's like a protester or had been in his past. This movie is awful in terms of the melancholy. This is a terribly depressing movie, but it's a great character study. It's just pretty much about a soldier who becomes severely injured by artillery attacks, and he spends the rest of the movie pretty much trying to convince this nurse to help him commit suicide because and it's just the character study and development of him throughout the film and with the people he interacts with. And it's a really, really interesting war movie.
Well, that's there's a Metallica song based on that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, really?
One.
Yeah, one.
Oh, that's based. I didn't know that was based on that.
They use clips from the movie. If you see the actual official video,
yes.
I didn't notice that.
I didn't know about that movie until I saw Metallica. Because then I saw the clips of that and I thought, well, what movie is that? Yeah, that's a tough situation there where you're basically, can't see, can't hear, nothing. All you can do is, tap your head to SOS.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
You think the movie's bad? Try reading the book.
Oh, really?
The book is
I couldn't imagine the detail that would go into the book. Just
it's a toughie.
Those kind of things are hard. As a matter of fact, I've gotten a little soft as I've gotten older because the truth is I used to like war movies when I was younger, and something happened in the 90s where I couldn't even handle it. And we'll get to that there, but I can't watch them anymore. They're just, and it's not like what, like I've talked about with horror before. Like, I just don't like the vibe that I get from it because I've been around that vibe for real. And, but it's more just the heart wrenching stuff. You get pulled into these people's lives. And that's what movies are all about. That's why we like movies. We get to go away and get to, if it's a good movie, we get sucked into that person's life. But boy, on those war movies, holy smokes, they really get you sucked into those things.
Oh yeah.
And that one I could imagine, especially if you read the book. Oh, the book on it, that's got to be even worse.
That's when he said that. I was like, they wrote a book about that? Oh.
Written by Dalton Trumbo, who was also a pacifist.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yes.
See, I like to see the, because a lot of war films are made from the perspective of like a glorification of a certain country.
Yeah.
Whatever country's making the war film. But then I like the stance that kind of steps back and says that we shouldn't be glorifying any of this, because we're killing people regardless of whose side you're on. And I like to see that character study as well. And so that's a big reason I enjoy that movie. But the last one from the 70s I have is from 1970, another one with Donald Sutherland. And this has Clint Eastwood, Kelly's Heroes. And it just always seems like Clint's going AWOL to find some gold, doesn't it? Like, it was from the Civil War and now, but, and then this one, for people who haven't seen it, it's pretty much about a drunk German officer spilling the beans about some gold behind his enemy's lines. And then a battalion of soldiers deciding it's worth it to try to, sneak in and devise a plan to get that gold. And it's a pretty good film. It's got a little bit more dark humor and some comedy, and it's a little bit more lighthearted than the Johnny Got His Gun. So
much like it's almost like an action comedy in some ways.
Exactly. I wouldn't say it goes as far as MASH or anything like that, but it's still got a lot of comedy in it.
Right. Well, Thrasher up. Give me a few of your thoughts on war movies from the 70s.
Well, the 70s was a very interesting period for war movies. In fact, as we were just earlier discussing, America's obsession with World War II, and particularly in the 80s, I think a lot of that stemmed from the fact in the 70s we lost Vietnam, and that was a national trauma. And I think in the 80s, what we're trying to do is to solve that. We were reminiscing to the big war that we did win. So we were sort of getting nostalgic of all things of World War II and sort of embracing our victory to sort of ease our defeat. And, it's funny, Derek, that you mentioned the sort of drop off on war films during the 70s. I don't think that was accidental. I think it was just something we weren't prepared to talk about in the 70s. We had suffered our first real military defeat and we're just trying to make it go away until there were two very, very influential films at the end of the 70s, both about Vietnam, which was sort of something Hollywood just didn't like talking about. There were some exceptions. For the most part, they didn't. But one was The Deer Hunter
Oh yeah.
Yep.
and the other one was Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
Now, neither one of these, it's not like they went out and made war films fun again, but both of them, it made it okay for us to talk about them again. The Deer Hunter, and one of the things I like about the Deer Hunter is it took us from the beginning. It took us from they're hanging out in Pennsylvania as mill workers, and they're even glorifying the war. They meet a soldier in a bar and try to chat with him, and they know they're going, but haven't really let it sink in. But then they go there, and it's the whole process. They're the veterans, and then they come home and they can't readjust. It takes us through their story, which makes it we don't know what they're going through, but at least we can understand a little better. And Apocalypse Now, of course, as you know, is based on the Joseph Conrad story, Heart of Darkness. So I wouldn't say it's an adventure, but it made the war something we could understand. Parts of it were very horrific, but it made it okay for us to talk about it again, which brought us into the 80s, peak of the Cold War. And what happened? We began to, I wouldn't say get ourselves psyched up for World War III, but at least we were better prepared to accept it. And that's why the 80s had sort of a war film renaissance. Now, they weren't all, I wouldn't say pro-war. A lot of them were actually anti-war. It's like, I don't know if any of you saw the comic book review I did about Blitzkrieg, that World War II comic.
Yeah.
The premise of that is, well, we're not glamorizing war with an action comic. We're just showing how tragic war is. And there were a lot of, shall we say, anti-war films or films that discouraged war in the 80s. But at least it became something both sides were willing to talk about. And I think you can't minimize the importance of both The Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now, even though they're both very, very different films.
Especially in trying to bring awareness to PTSD to the general public, because it's still an issue that a lot of people struggle with learning and trying to support, but it's gotten a lot better, especially in like the last 10 years. I'd say it's kind of taken a right turn with like the I Got Your Six program and things like that. But before that, these movies really were some of the first things to kind of even tell people that was a thing that, people that had been to war and battle could come home and talk about it and explain it. And you could tell maybe something was different about them, but it wasn't until they started, putting it up there in some ways, with some vulgarity and shock factor that really it kind of brings to the attention that, man, these guys went through some stuff and they're not okay,
Right.
And that's important too.
I like what you said there, Thrash Pondo, and it's something that I had not really thought about. And of course, it's something I hadn't thought about because I was really just a kid. I was really in the 70s. I was born, in the early 70s. And so I was just a kid, but I didn't really think about the fact that it may have been a too touchy of a subject to talk about. And the fact that the films came out made it okay. Made it okay to say, oh, hey, it's okay to talk about at least and get the ball rolling on a conversation. And, I couldn't imagine going through something that traumatic and then talking about it or having people say things about it. And you don't know how the conversation is going to go. So, Deer Hunter for you, and also Apocalypse Now. Do you have a third one, or you want to stop at two?
If I had to pick a third one from the 70s, if I had to pick a third one, I would probably want to go with something a little more mainstream, and I would probably go with A Bridge Too Far. I have an old credo. Any war film with the word bridge in the title is a good one. Okay. And Bridge Too Far is excellent. While it was very much Hollywoodized, and certain elements were certainly changed for the benefit of the story, it was a surprisingly accurate war film. For those of you who've studied Operation Market Garden. And I liked how the fact that they actually told it from both sides. Very similar to my favorite war film at least my favorite World War II war film was Bridget Remagen. They kind of go that route, and I did like it. I thought the performances were amazing. And again, who doesn't love a good World War II flick? So I would have to go with A Bridge Too Far.
What was that movie with Mark Hamill in it. It was a war movie, and the guy from MASH.
Oh,
I remember seeing that on television, and
yes,
and like he commanded these guys to go up the mountain. I remember this one scene where he commanded these guys to go up the mountain, and Mark Hamill was going up, and he gets scared, and the guy,
the big red one,
the big the guy from
one.
MASH starts shooting at him, like you're not coming back down the mountain. Basically, you're gonna go up. You're gonna do that because he.
Wow, I wrote that down. I haven't seen that.
The big red one, and I think you're thinking of Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin was the top sergeant in Big Red One.
Was he okay? For my mind, in my mind, it's the guy from MASH, one of the guys from MASH. Anyway, so I don't know. Well, I'm going to keep my
That's
comments.
A good one.
I'm going to keep my comments brief on the 70s, and I'll actually start us out on the 80s because that's really where my war knowledge picks up. But I mean, it's hard for me not to think about the 70s and think about MASH, the movie. Now, okay, if we said television shows, it'd be a different subject. But I'm talking about the movie MASH. Very heart-wrenching show. I mean, and the song is super. I mean, it's like the pinnacle of what's called existential philosophy. Just basically, you might as well kill yourself because life is just too painful. And so I think MASH kind of makes a big impact. The other one that you obviously that you mentioned for me is Apocalypse Now. I saw that, and the Deer Hunter. Those are the three. But I'm going to push this into the 80s because this is kind of where my knowledge, at least, steps up. And in the 80s, there was this revisit of Vietnam, a revisit of World War II, and then imaginations about the Cold War. And the one big movie for me that scared me senseless was Red Dawn. Does anybody remember that original?
The original Red Dawn.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
That movie, we went and watched that movie, and I slept that night with all my weapons by my bed because I think I've told you before I wanted to be a ninja, so I had like a sword, and it wasn't even sharp. I had like a sword and a blow dart and a blow dart gun, and like a club or something like that. These are all my ninja. I was so scared after that show came out. I literally thought any minute that we were going to be invaded by the Russians and going to be taken over, and I was going to have to go out into the hills and. Well, if I would have been one of the survivors, watch my
wake up in the night, Wolverines.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of those shows that scared me when I was younger. But I watched it again when I was older, and I realized, man, it was a harsh show. I mean, it was sad to have these people who were basically kids, high school kids, have to take that trauma on. And although it's a little. Yeah, maybe a little unrealistic. I don't know, whether or not high school kids could have pulled that off. It doesn't downplay the trauma of it, I guess is what I'm saying. It doesn't.
High school kids today couldn't pull that off. I don't know about in the 80s.
Yeah, no, we couldn't have.
He said no, not us either. Fair enough.
We would have tried harder.
Yeah,
but we would have failed.
That's it. Yeah,
we would have failed.
So that was
my friends and I actually scouted the woods in our town, trying to find places that would make cool hiding spots and supply depots for if the Soviets ever did try to take Cape Cod. We'd be able to fall into the woods and mount a counterattack. So
yeah,
there was something to it.
That's crazy.
Well, there's so many of the 80s that those were modern ones, but another one that came out in the 80s was a movie called Glory. I don't know if you were familiar with that one, Derek, or not.
Yeah, I had it written down. It was one of my four from the 80s.
All right, I'll let you talk about that.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. I don't have much about it. You go for it.
Well, it was a show that we were also really kind of reconsidering racism. When I was a kid, racism was still a really, really big thing. It seems almost less now. It seems like it's almost. I mean, I know that in some parts of the country it's still a really big deal, but I remember even as late as like '94 when I went to school in Texas, And they told us, and I was at this missions compound. It was kind of it was away from any big city, and it was this little extension campus of what was called University of the Nations, which was in Hawaii, but they had an extension campus in Texas. And so I went to this place to do like a 3-month training program, and then I did another 3 months over in Israel. But I was there, and it was in kind of the heart of Texas. It was about 3 hours east of Dallas, in this little town called Lindale. And it was the closest town was a town called Tyler, Texas, which is fairly big, but that was considered a small town for Texas. And don't misunderstand me, I love Texas. That was a great place. If there's a place on the earth that I could move and go back to, it'd be Texas. It was great. But we were warned, we were told, like, because we had people, because it was a Christian school, we had people from all over the world. We had people from Africa there. We had people from, just people all over the world, brown people, black people. And they got us and they said, look, there are certain places here that you can't go. Or if you go, you have to be careful. You can't go after dark, especially. They might go, whatever, but they'll come and, they'll come and find you, or that, it will get bad. You'll get harassed. And so to Glory, which was a couple years before that, I was still in the same kind of within 10-year era. Was one of those movies where it was just like, hey, we got to pay some respect to people who weren't white, who, fought for us at some point. And so that was one of those shows that kind of, impacted me, I should say, to some degree or another, was that show Glory. Another show from that era that impacted me, I'm sure you guys are going to love this one, is Platoon, right? I mean, that's I could go on and on about war movies in the 80s. Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, Born on the 4th of July. These were all such really good shows. What was the name of that other show? What was the name of that show with Michael J. Fox in it?
Casualties of War.
Casualties of War.
Sean Penn is the bad guy.
Yeah,
one of them.
Casualties of War. I thought that was really good. That show, Born on the 4th of July. Did either of you ever see that show? That movie? Keep calling them shows.
Tom Cruise, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
That was a harsh one. As well.
Yeah. Kind of a post-war study.
Yeah. Post-war. And then I don't know if this counts or not, but the one of the things too that kind of got me into the genre was the First Blood. Watching this guy come back off of Vietnam and having to try to readjust to society. So those are my picks for 80s war movies. Whoever wants to go next, you're more than welcome to chime in here at any point.
Derek, would you like to dig in, or?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll go ahead. So I'll talk about one, probably the weirdest film I have on this list. It's called Grave of the Fireflies. Okay.
No kidding.
It's on my list.
He has. Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'll keep it pretty brief. 1988.
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay, it's an animated film from *88. It's directed by Isao Takahata, and it's a heartbreaking animated film. It kind of reminds me of like something that like a Studio Ghibli would do if they wanted to go like a way bigger character studied like war film. But it's about these two sisters that they're kind of trying to navigate, really the world or their region during World War II after being separated from their parents after a firebombing. And it's just kind of, like I said, like a study of these two characters and what they have to go through and what they do. And but it's told in kind of a fantastical animated type of setting. But it still keeps grounded enough in its war roots that it feels real. Like it feels like something these kids are really experiencing. This is happening. And it just uses a lot of like metaphors and things like that. But it's a great film. And I'll that's where I'll keep it at that. So you can say some things too. But like I said, Glory was on my list. So yeah, definitely Denzel Washington. Great movie, which it's about the first all black regiment during the Civil War. they were supposed to be used for like a backup battalion, but ended
Yeah.
up getting thrust into battle again and again and again and again. Hamburger Hill is a good one with Don Cheadle.
I never saw that one.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good
Yeah.
one. You should check it out. I have it on DVD. It's a pretty good film. It's got Don Cheadle and Dylan McDermott is the other actor in it. He didn't quite make it as big as Don Cheadle, but he's still a working actor. And this, it takes place over a 10-day span in 1969, while, soldiers try to take advantage of a hill in the Vietnam War. Pretty simple story, short period of time, but a good movie. And the last one I have is Empire of the Sun from 1987, which is one of Christian Bale's first big movies.
Okay.
It also has John Malkovich and Ben Stiller, though, too. And I can't remember the gentleman's name now, but he plays the sleazy little snaky guy in the first Matrix movie. The one that's like wants to get out and he's eating the steak. And he's I can't even taste it. He's in that movie. I can't remember his name.
Palmentary?
Yes,
yes.
Terry, yeah. You're on the right track.
It's something like that. Yeah.
Yes.
He's been around forever, too.
Yes,
and I can't think
exactly. And he's great in just about everything he's in. He's kind of like a Brad Dourif. He just appears and stuff, and you're like, he's great. He's been around forever. Where did he come from?
He was the pimp in Risky Business.
Yes.
Oh, was he?
Yes, he was. He was the pimp in Risky Business.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a great actor.
He's great in it as well. Excellent.
And then this one is just about it's kind of a different style of war film too. Not as much about the action of the war. It's more about these people. If I'm trying to remember right, it's been a couple of years since I've seen this one, but they live in Shanghai during the war while the war is happening. They're not soldiers, but they're living in Shanghai. And then when the Japanese take over China, they become prisoners of war or enslaved in these camps, pretty much. And it's kind of about them trying to keep the peace and hope alive in this camp during the remainder of the war, if I remember right. But it's got a lot of like heartwarming moments as well as moments that just kind of make you go, oh wow, that's but it feels very grounded, and like I said, it doesn't rely as much on the action, so it's able to kind of keep more of a relatable setting to the war as well.
Cool. All right, Thrash.
Excellent. I have some picks that I think are kind of slick. One, I want to open with, this is more of a prison camp movie, but it's still, in my opinion, a World War II film, and it's starring David Bowie. It's Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. Either one of you seen this one?
No, I
haven't seen that one.
It is an amazing film. It takes place in the South Pacific, and a group of royal military men are being held in this POW camp, and David Bowie plays a recent addition to the camp, and he and the camp commandant basically end up getting involved in a pissing contest, and both trying to outdo one another. And the Japanese commandant is played by, I'm going to butcher his name, I apologize, Yurikyo Sakamura, who I believe did the soundtrack for The Last Emperor. And I want to say he worked on the soundtrack of Empire of the Sun as well. I'm not 100% on that. But yeah, he stars as the camp commander, and it's just an amazing film, and it's got a wonderful supporting cast. Tom Conte plays Jack Selliers, that's the Bowie's character, best friend, and he sort of serves as our narrator. And I can't think of the guy's name to save my life. He's this amazing Japanese actor. He plays a character called Sergeant Hara. And one of the things I like most about this movie is, even though they are transparently the bad guys, the Japanese are three-dimensional characters, and you end up, at least on some level, empathizing with them, even in a prison camp movie. And the whole thing just works on so many levels. And I don't want to give the game away, but it's a must-see. Another movie, and one of the weird things is, war movies tend to stick with more, I don't want to say popular wars, but wars most people have talked about. I actually picked one. It's set in the Afghan War, and it's during the Russian War, not our involvement in Afghanistan. It's called The Beast, and it's about a Soviet tank crew that gets separated from its column and has to try to fight its way back to its own lines. And a group of Mujahideen that try to take them out, and we actually see it from both sides. Got an amazing cast. Stephen Bauer's in it. Jason Patrick's in it. Oh, that guy from the Law and Order, George Zamuda. I always say his name wrong, but he plays the tank commander, and it's just an excellent film. And there's a lot of drama and intrigue, and I can't recommend it enough. And there's one more I'd like to throw out, by the way, only because we were talking about Grenada a little earlier. For my recollection, I think it's the only movie set during the Grenada campaign, and it's a Clint Eastwood movie, and it's one of my favorites, and it's called Heartbreak Ridge. And again, it's more of a action adventure than an actual real war movie, but I remember seeing it when I was in high school and just loving it. It's Clint Eastwood. How can you not love Clint Eastwood?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to say a couple more things about the 80s too, just in general. One of the things that we were all really concerned about, and this did play into movies, was prisoners of war. Remember that? There was this thing that was like, oh man, there are people still over in Vietnam and they're not out and all this stuff. And one of the movies, or one of the franchises, I should say, was that the Chuck Norris franchise. What was Missing in Action? Right. Missing in Action, and Missing in Action 2, where they go back to rescue people who are in war. And Rambo,
of course,
Rambo, where they go back to kind of rescue those. I don't know if you've ever seen the Missing in Actions or Missing in Actions 2, but they're pretty fantastic films.
I've heard of them, but I haven't seen them. No.
They're a little more karate, cheesy kind of films rather than kind of dirty, suck you into it, emotional kind of films. It's more of a display to watch Chuck Norris kick some butt. But that's cool. Deal. Yeah, that was a big deal. Let's go in reverse. This time. Thrash, take us into 90s war movies.
Okay, there's we're going back to
unless you have something else to say about the 80s.
Oh no, I think if I think of it, I'll go back to it. I think the 80s have been adequately covered. In the 90s, we're going to go back to World War II for a second, though. I don't know if any of you guys seen it. It's an Ethan Hawke movie. It was called A Midnight Clear. Anyone?
No.
It's not ringing a bell.
It's right before, right around the time of the Battle of the Bulge. A group of American soldiers, all suffering from battle fatigue, run across a group of Germans that want to surrender, but can't for political reasons. And they try to enter into this uneasy alliance. And one of the things they try to do is because it takes place around Christmas time, they make reference to the much talked about World War I Christmas truce that took place in 1914, where both sides just, stopped fighting and ended up supposedly they had a little football match in no man's land because neither side were actually fighting. And they try to embrace that and also come to terms with the fact that, well, we're all people and can't we try to help each other in these last days of the war? And it's a drama. So I don't want to give the game away, but I will tell you things do not turn out well. It's got a great cast. Gary Sinise is in it. Ethan Hawke. John McGinley.
Ethan Hawke is one of those actors that's fantastic, and he just never got this role that
never got the foothold.
Real. But everything he's been in, I've just enjoyed. Really enjoyed.
He's really good.
I think he kind of went the Swan from Warriors route, where every time he gets a big film, his follow-up film was not a success.
Yeah.
So it was almost like he kept trying to jumpstart, and the engine never quite turned over. Eddie Murphy went the same route. Good film, mediocre film. Good film, mediocre film. Good, and you kind of go back and forth. And Eddie Murphy's film career, could have been much, 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 much greater. I mean, the talent was there. I think he found scripts that didn't work. That worked on paper, but didn't work when you put them on the screen. And
yeah.
Kind of digressing from our point, but I think Ethan Hawke is in the same tempo.
We weren't talking about that Eddie Murphy war movie. What was
he did a war movie. It's called Best Defense.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, with Dudley Moore.
Yes, and Kate Capshaw.
Yeah, I do remember that. It was kind of a comedy war
on
movie.
the spot trivia with Thrash Pondo.
Out of the fire, you know.
Right, and I remember that.
Yeah. Oh, and another one, and I can't for the life of me remember if this is 89 or 90, but I'm going to put it in the 90 column just because I didn't cover it in the 80s. It's another Arlie Ermey flick, and it's called, give me Attack on Firebase Gloria. It was sort of a sleeper hit back in the day, and it's sort of a Vietnam movie if it was done by on the template of an old Western. A small group of American Marines who were just about to be rotated out stumble upon reports of the Tet Offensive. And when they report it to their commanding officers, they get brushed off. So they end up deciding, well, if anything's going to do anything about it, it's going to have to be us. And they hold up in this fire base, basically deciding to break the back of the Viet Cong offensive. And it's certainly an action movie, but I thought it was very well put together. Arlie Ermey, who was really getting on in years at this point, did an amazing job, and I thought it made a nice, if not necessarily accurate, war film from the 90s.
Cool, really cool. All right, Derek, take us into the 90s. What do you think, man?
Okay, so we have a weird transition here. Another pattern I noticed, which I don't know if that's my OCD or if I have something else going on, but I'm always noticing these patterns. I don't know. But so I noticed that here, most of these movies, we start straying away from the modern film, like guns and stuff, and start kind of transitioning back further into time. So most of my 90s films that I really enjoy that are war films are Civil War films. So they kind of start going from your World War back revolutionary. You got, I think the Patriot might have actually, was it 2000? It might be a 2000s, but anyway,
I thought it was 90s. No, it was 90s.
Okay.
It was 90s. I remember when it came out, I was still working, and it came out like right around the same time the first Star Wars prequel came out. So so
98, 99.
Yeah.
So right there. Cool. Okay. That's good to know. So that's a good example. So you got the Patriot, you got Gettysburg, Braveheart, which goes back even further.
Yeah.
Another good Mel Gibson movie. Saving Private Ryan is a World War II movie that came out in 98. Obviously a great film. I'm trying to think, Last of the Mohicans. I mean, you just really, it's almost like it's like we've told this story, so let's go back and tell the stories we haven't told yet, or that we haven't told since, like the 50s. You had good revolutionary films in the 50s. One of my favorites is Johnny Tremaine, a Walt Disney film. And I just adore that movie. And so it's almost like they went through that, and then they went through their cycle of World War films and Vietnam and Korea. And once that kind of got told, they were like, well, people still want war films, but we've told them these stories. We got to start going back further to find the stories we haven't told as recently. And I think that's kind of what happened in the 90s. But like I said, there are a lot of good, Saving Private Ryan came out in the 90s. And obviously that's a terrific World War II film.
Yeah.
But there's just so many good. I think the 90s was really strong for war films. I think it might be my favorite decade of war movies.
Yeah. I have to say, for me, it's a split between 80s and 90s too. And the reason why is of course 70s are good, but I'm really I wasn't conscious enough to really enjoy them back then. But one of the things that started happening in the 90s is we started being able to get more realistic with the what's it called? The special effects. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. The special effects. And you mentioned something, Derek, in your video about Saving Private Ryan, about how realistic it was, and that the people who were still around today or back in the 90s
or were I don't know if we have any left. I know recently that they were kind of talking about some of the last veterans
from World War II
passing.
They're just a generation that's pretty much almost gone. But the people who did see that, they said they were talking about like how realistic it was. And of course, that was the explosion of the internet. So you could go on these chat boards and read about that kind of stuff. So, it wasn't just your grandfather or somebody you knew. You could hear about a whole variety of people that you didn't know saying kind of the same thing. And I just remember hearing about that. And for me, that was one of the movies that disturbed me like the most. Like I literally, after watching that movie, could not sleep. Like that show left such an impact on me, especially that scene where that guy was putting the knife in that guy's heart and saying, it's okay. And just,
that's so rough.
It was so rough. Yeah. And he was pushing it down and it wasn't just like it was at the end of this big battle, and it was a battle that didn't have to be lost. There was that guy that was on the steps that was just wimping out totally.
Yeah.
And then at the end, he shoots that guy, and for me, I was upset. That was not redemption for me. I was like too little, too late.
Yeah, I smack you if I see you, man.
Yeah, I know. That
just smack the actor when you see him. Sorry, that was some pent up rage from a long time ago. That was a rough movie, but the very beginning of the movie, where they're getting off the bus on D-Day, and you just see them getting mowed down, and the realism of everything that's kind of happening there is just to explode. But again, like what you're saying too. Movies that are on my list are on your list too, and it's kind of weird because they kind of go out of that war era, because one of mine is Braveheart. I thought, man, what an awesome show. And almost we've all been talking about like modern war, like almost, except for we mentioned Glory. It's almost been modern war, but we forgot about that whole genre of war that you brought up, Derek, in your show, ancient war. And Braveheart, man, what an amazing show that is. That's a war movie too. We can't just fixate on machine guns. It's just like, it's hard not to. There's so many good World War movies out there, but you forget that just because they were clashing swords,
Right. And then there's that whole transition period of World War One. In World War One, people don't know. Well, maybe you guys know this because you know your stuff when it comes to history. But in World War One, they were still using horses and swords and lances. Mm-hmm. They were still using horses and swords and lances at the same time they were using tanks.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is. You're right. That is a perfect transitional war, because you talk about that. There's a movie, even War Horse. And 1917, you get to see a lot of horses. So yeah, it's crazy. I didn't know that until the movie War Horse. Came out a few years ago, and I was like, well, I probably did, because like you said, I've studied history a lot in my life, and it's actually what I have most of my college credit hours in. But I just didn't really put it together until you start seeing guns and like tanks and horses at the same time. You're like, what's happening?
Yeah, a horse literally they could have a battle where there'd be a horse at the same time there was a tank, and that happened in World War One. That quickly went out. By the way, just a little history. When you're watching like the Patriot, and you're looking at those guys sitting up on the battlefield, and you're like, isn't this insane? Where they're just pointing their guns at each other, and they're just like, you shoot, then we shoot, then you shoot, then we shoot. And we'll just see who.
They just used the volley.
Yeah.
They would volley.
The weapons were so inaccurate.
Yes.
And now they're so accurate. Well, look at the Napoleonic Wars. The best defense in the Napoleonic Wars were these tight squares. Then the machine gun came out. And the worst thing you could possibly do with the advent of the machine gun is pat together in tight squares. Now it's spread out. So the machine gun was really a game changer, at the risk of, being obvious.
Right.
You see the people on the other side bunched together, and they're just like, okay, watch this.
Right. Well, a lot of that changed too in America when we started learning tactics from the Native Americans. because the Native Americans would hide and shoot each other, and then raid, and then
guerrilla warfare.
Yeah, but that a lot of people don't know that where that comes from. At least if I believe that I'm getting it right. Of course, always double check me on everything I say, but it comes from the fact that when we used to fight, armies used to fight, you were using swords and bows and arrows and lances and spears, and in order to do that, you had to have a big field, and you had to engage. You had to go up to a person and stab them. So now you get gunpowder. Now what do? Okay, well, you're still used to facing that person. I got to go up to you and stab you and shoot you. So that's kind of a holdover from that. Why they were in a big field and okay, we'll have our battle here. You agree? Okay, we agree. And we're just going to shoot at each other. But that's really a holdover from the idea of, if I'm going to have a battle with another army, I've actually got to reach them with the sword or reach them with the spear.
It was and it's almost like a face to, if a man will fight face to face, there was also that pride aspect of it too. I think that played a little bit of a part. We're not going to flank you, we're going to stand right in front of your face.
Stan, yeah, that would have sucked to say, okay, it's your turn. Everybody line up shoulder to shoulder and hope you don't get hit.
No, it would be awful. Yeah. And then who tells who, okay, you're going to stay in the front.
Oh,
I mean, it's not like the front lines now where you have a strategy. It was just you are the front line, you're the shield.
Right.
You're the shield.
Right. Well, other shows from that era that I really enjoyed was obviously The Patriot. I thought it was great. And then a couple of, borderline shows. Did you ever see Three Kings?
Yes.
I think I have seen that.
With George Clooney and
Mark Wahlberg.
Yes.
Yeah. Where it's in Iraq, but they are they're kind of on a mission to find gold or something like that.
It's sort of like a modern day Kelly's Heroes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great, good comparison.
And have you guys seen Navy SEALs? Did you see that movie? Charlie Sheen?
Oh wait,
yes, yeah. With the guy who played Show Enough. Was it the guy from Briscoe County Jr.? I can't think of his name.
Oh, was he in that too?
Yes, he was in Navy SEALs. Yes, he plays one of the Navy SEAls. I can't think of his name to save my life. Yeah,
I can't think of it. Okay, it's not ringing a bell for me.
It's very 90s. It's very 90s. It's a good movie. It's a lot of fun. It's very 90s. All right.
Is my screen too bright for anyone? Because I got the sun coming in. I can go shut it if it's.
It's not too bright. You're a little washed out, but it's not too bright.
Let me go close it.
Okay. Because I got one last question for you. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So here's the question for you before we close out the show, and that is, what do you want to see from war? Well, we've skipped the last 20 years, but of course this is a nostalgia program, so we're going to keep it 70s, 80s, 90s. What do you want to see from war movies in the future? What kind of movies?
So, let me think. War movies in the future, I think.
What would you like to see as far as being tackled?
Seeing a more unified approach to war films, I think. More countries collaborating to make a war film. So for instance, and I'm kind of running blanks on the names right now on some of the war movies. I don't think I had any on my list. Let me make sure. I might have had some of the, and this is not really what I'm talking about, but one from the 60s I had was Storm Over the Pacific. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. It's actually a Japanese movie, and it stars I had it right there, and I don't want to say it and get it wrong. Yes, Toshiro Mifune. I wanted to make sure I had him right, so everybody knows who he is if you like Japanese older Japanese movies. But he so that was in 60, and it told the story of a man who was in the Japanese military at the time that we bombed Pearl Harbor, and they share success in that, and then it kind of shows their morale kind of going down as they lose Midway, and then the aftermath of that, which we know, and so it's a really powerful movie. But I would like to see movies like that combined with movies like I don't know, not obviously different parts of the world at this time, but like Saving Private Ryan, where you have you're really playing both sides really well. But I don't want to see it made by one country. I want to see it. We got several Taiwanese and South Korean co-productions. or you know, a lot of I'm trying to think of what else. I think Japanese and South Korea does a lot of co-productions as well. Now, I like seeing those. You usually have 2 or 3 directors, different nationalities. And I'd like to see more of those types of projects. Sorry, my dog's scratching around. I'd like to see more types of projects like that with in war films, and not just like, we get a lot of like thrillers like that and horror movies like that. But I'd like to see some more war films with co-productions between countries.
What about you, Thrash? What do you want to see in war movies? Like, what kind of movies would you want to see?
I'll use this as an example. Let me use this, my least favorite war film, as a template. Pearl Harbor with Ben Affleck. One of my least favorite films, and I'll tell you why. It was sort of at the peak of the time when we talk about special effects and the filmmaking of blockbusters and these visual spectaculars. It seemed to me that the film industry started to lose the importance of the story and the historic backdrop. Now, that's not to say you can't have a war film where there's more going on besides the war. I mean, a lot of the best war films made the war simply a backdrop. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The Civil War is just sort of a thing in the background. One of a favorites I didn't actually get to today, but I'm going to mention it now. It's set during the Napoleonic Wars. It's called The Duelists, with Harvey Keitel and Keith Carradine. And it's about these two guys who have this ongoing rivalry. And it takes place over the 15 years of the Napoleonic Wars.
Isn't it with swords too?
Yes, well, swords and pistols. They deal with swords and pistols. But it's an amazing movie. There are a few battle sequences in it, but the war is really in the background. But it seemed to me in Pearl Harbor, they almost forgot there was a war going on. It's all about the love triangle. Now, when the battles were there, they don't really cover the historical significance of what's going on. They just made these like big, impressive spectacles with these massive CGI explosions and whatnot.
Michael Bay. No, sorry.
I was like, okay.
This reminded me of Michael Bay.
Well, yeah, seriously, very, very much along the, or James Cameron. They love to go over the top, and when they're going over the top, it's like, one of my favorite analogies is like, take a good marinara sauce. I love a good marinara sauce. I couldn't eat a bowl of it. It has to be a sauce on top of a very good dish. Special effects are the sauce on top of a good dish. I mean, there's that famous scene where after the battle, and he doesn't want to take part in it, but after the battle, they're asking Yamamoto, stunning victory, I think we're going to win. And he goes, I feel all we have done is awaken a sleeping giant.
Yeah. And
in Pearl Harbor, he says it, but they almost don't give him a chance. It's like he's rushing the line because he knows they're going to cut and go back to Ben Affleck and the other guy. You all know the love triangle.
Josh Hartnett.
Thank you. And it's going to go back to them and their little like bromance. And I'm like, can we at least focus on the nuts and bolts of this story? And I would like to see more of that. More realism and a depiction of the stories of the players involved. Like, take for example, like Flag of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima. I thought those were excellent works, and they played to what you were saying, Derek, about the cross production. Get the other side involved. Tell us their story. One, before I get too far off topic, there was some wonderful Japanese films. Now, the funny thing about Japanese war cinema, and immediately afterwards, during the occupation, they weren't permitted to make any entertainment that glorified war. It was actually, I believe, written in their constitution, but they simply weren't permitted to because you didn't want to start a second militarist period. So their war films were actually anti-war films. And like one of my favorites is, and I highly recommend this to you, Derek, it's Fire on the Plains, which is about a guy who's separated from his unit in the Philippines and some of the horrors he endures. Another is the Human Condition films. That's a trilogy. Those were all excellent. But again, we have firsthand accounts from the veterans. We could flesh a film out and make it far more accurate than a lot of times we try to. And that's what I'd like to see more of.
And I wanted to mention something that just before I know ENC's probably got some things he wants to say too, but there were a couple films that I really, really wanted to at least touch on that weren't quite in the category, but that I haven't got to talk about yet that I feel like are really important war films. And one is Taigoogie. It's a South Korean movie from 2004. It's about the Korean War. It's about these two brothers. One of them is like the older brother, obviously, very protective. Even before the war breaks out, he's saving up money from his job to send his younger brother to college. And but then once they both get drafted, he makes a deal with his officers that if I go on the riskiest missions, keep my brother at the camp. He doesn't go to war. He doesn't see battle. And you start to see like his humanity fall away as he has to endure these harder and harder things. And his relationship with his brother is damaged because of it. And it's a really good movie. The 800 was the highest grossing film in China in 2020 and the second highest grossing film in the world, obviously because China has such a big market. Wow. But it's a really good war movie that came out just a couple years ago. That's about 800 Chinese soldiers defending, I believe, Shanghai from 20,000 Japanese intruders. Wow. That are just bombing and berating. And it's a really interesting movie. And you see a lot of national pride for the Chinese in the film. And that's pretty interesting to see. And then obviously We Were Soldiers, which I think is maybe one of the greatest war films ever made.
That was a good movie. That's another Mel Gibson movie, isn't it?
Yeah. He's for me, I think my dad played a big part in it, and I know obviously there's controversy surrounding him as an individual, but his acting presence for me is almost untouchable. Like he's up there with like the DiCaprios for me in terms of just how good he could portray a character on screen.
Yeah, for sure. He's a tremendous actor in most everything that he does.
Oh, so good. But anyway, yeah, those are the three I had. I just wanted to make sure I talked about those because if you're into any of these movies that I've talked about before, even though these are newer, they would fit right into your niche. So
yeah. Well, I mean, you start getting into the early 2000s, that's almost getting as far away from us as the 90s. You know,
it's close.
Really, it's starting to be. I mean, that was 20 years ago, the 2000, 22 years ago. So it is starting to get a little bit nostalgic. Thinking about that. What I think is going to happen with war movies is we're going to see a gambit. I mean, it's going to be just like every decade. We're going to see some that are good and some that are bad. That's all there is to it. We're going to have some good ones. We're going to have some bad ones. The technology is there to obviously make it way more realistic. I'd love to see more realism, but also more fidelity to history as well. That's obviously, I kind of want to see that as well. Fidelity to history. By the way, a quick story. Remember, there was a show. It had John Bon Jovi and it was a war movie. Let's see. It came out in 2000. U571. Remember that?
Yes. The sub movie, obviously.
Yeah, the sub movie, where it was kind of based. I don't know if it was a total true story, but it was based on a true story about how they found the crypter thing that Hitler was using, and they were able to decipher what he was going to do. And they had like a few of those machines and they had to get it somewhere or something like that. I can't remember the basics of the story, but it was either a true story or is based on a true story. But yeah, I mean, basically they found out Hitler's cryptic, the way he would write messages. They found out the code, which he would write messages in. And one of the saddest and most tragic stories was they found this out and they had planned on bombing a London city. And who's the guy? The main guy in World War II, not the bad guy, the good guy for England.
Oh, Churchill.
Churchill knew about it, and he knew, and his first instinct was to go and get everybody out of the town. But if he did that, he knew that he would tip his hat to Hitler, and Hitler would just change his code, and it would devastate them, set them way back in winning the war against Hitler. And so the tragic thing that he had to do was to let that town get bombed. And he hated it. He still struggled over that. But if he would have rescued those people, they would have known, oh, they understand our code. Let's change our code. And they would have pushed the war back another, 10, 12 years. Who knows how long they would have pushed the war back, but they couldn't tip their hat that they knew. Oh man.
It kind of reminds me of like the authorities in charge of kind of orchestrating the nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If you watch accurate depictions of them making those decisions, they're heartbroken. They're like, we don't want to do this. They didn't know exactly the type of devastation that dropping a nuclear bomb on land on people would do and how long it would affect them, how many casualties they'd be. But they knew what would happen if they invaded without doing it, and how many lives of their civilians would be lost and our soldiers. And it was a really tough, like, weighing situation where they're like, what do we do here? And then by the time they do pick, they're just broken, but they're just like, we got to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are tough decisions when it comes to war. So I'd like to see maybe some more realism when it comes to war movies, as far as that's concerned. But
the device you were thinking, it was called the Enigma machine, just in case that's what it was.
The Enigma machine, yes, right.
I didn't remember that name until you said it, and then I'm like, okay, that's
All right, guys, what do you got going on over at your channels? And then we'll wrap this thing up here in the final and for finality. Tell us what you're doing over there on your channels. Go ahead, Derek.
Okay. Well, right now I'm just finishing up the war series we talked about earlier, so I won't touch too much on that. My dad, who is the Army veteran we spoke of, is going to be giving his one or two top modern war films during kind of like the eras he served, to give insight onto realism. And but most of the things, like I said, he wasn't an actual combat veteran, so most of his experiences are just like, how are the soldiers acting? How are their commanders acting? How is the organization? That sort of thing, the tactics. He knows that area of it, so he really likes to pay attention. That's why he likes We Were Soldiers so much. He always talks about how good and real and stuff that felt for his era of military training. And then I'm going to do like a comedy series similar to that, and a serial killer series of films, obviously similar to that. I've got a Batman ranking of all the Batman theatrical releases, which is, we were talking about doing Batman.
Oh yeah,
so that's really
neat. Yes.
And so it's all fresh on my mind because of this. Me and Lee Matthias are teaming up to do just ranking our theatrical releases of Batman films, starting with the Adam West Batman movie, not the TV show, but the movie he did, where the Joker surfs. And enough said. And then I know I'm working on my short film. I've got the storyboard I've got to complete this weekend, which I just got a couple panels and stuff, and the official script. So like, I'm going to go over the script. I have some changes to make at the very end and send that out. And we're going to start filming that, I believe, like the second week of March. I'm just trying to get a little bit of support through the Patreon to try to get the cabin. Because I'm going to have to buy it either way, but a little bit of support helps for the short film in terms of that and funding. But it's going to be like $300 for the 2 nights I'm going to rent it. And then we're doing so it's going to be a 3-day shoot, 2 nights at the cabin, then 1 night in the woods closer to my house on public land. So, and then we'll wrap that up, and hopefully I'll have it released around Halloween is my plan.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Thrash, what do you got going on over your channel?
Well, I still have my ongoing program where all new subscribers get to request a post on whatever topic they'd like, and I produce it for them. Just my way of saying I treasure every one of you. So to any people who want to subscribe to me, just tell me what you like a post on, and I'll do it. I've had some other success with a little other thing I'm doing. I've discovered an old cache of old, very silly vintage comic books I've had forever, and I'm presenting them onto my channel in something I call a wretched recap, where I don't read through them, but I just kind of highlight some of the best action and funniest bits, and kind of just do a little bit of a half read through and cover some of the silly old archaic advertisements that were in those old comics, and people seem to be enjoying them. So far there have been 2 of them. So please check out my wretched recaps. Also, I'm still getting some very good feedback on my series on the top 10 worst dad jokes of all time. I'm up to about installment 12, I want to say at this point.
Yeah.
And
my kids hate me for them, but I love them.
And just for laughs, every now and then, I'm going to do reviews on old vintage sci-fi books and movies.
Right on.
Which is where I started.
And you're close to that 100 mark, so we need to get you there. So if you're listening to this and you've not subscribed to either Derek's channel or Thrash Pondo's channel, you know what to do. Go out there and hit that subscribe button. It's absolutely free to you, and it means the world to us. And while you're at it, if you're listening to this and you haven't subscribed, I'd like to take our relationship to the next level and have you
do it now.
Yes, do it now. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the share button. If you're listening to this on podcast, please write me a review. Also share it. Give me a star rating. And if you're listening to this on podcast, we're going to have Derek at least either this Monday or next Monday on the live program, depending on how quickly I get this out, because I want to get it out in time for you to listen to it and then be over there. But I do this a lot. So if there's a show you're interested in, normally that guest I'll have on the live program. So if you want to ask Derek some questions, you want to ask Thrash Pondo some questions and be involved in our chat, and you like what we're doing on the podcast, head on over to the page, or head on over to the YouTube page and check it out, because we're going to be doing a live show over there where you can interact with these guests. All right, and with all that said, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And if you want to help me build this YouTube mogul empire, you can go ahead and support me on Patreon, where you'll find 2 levels of support: the Cornflake Club, $3 a month, and the Honeycomb Hideout, $5 a month, which is you get most all videos 1 day in advance ahead of everyone else. And I will have links to these guys' channels in the description below, so that'll make it really easy for you to hit on their channel and hit the description. You're Derek. He's trying to raise money for this movie. It's going to be awesome. Please, by all means, go and help him out. And look, the least you can do, as I said before, is just like the video and subscribe to the channel. I mean, that really does help us out quite a bit, and it means the world to us.
Absolutely.
All right, folks. Thanks for watching Retro Serial or listening to Retro Serial. Until we meet again, stay